This is Jono's World, conversation for everyone.
Hello, everyone. This is Jono and Professor Howard Williams, and this is Welcome to Wrexham podcast episode. It's Jono's World, but the name of the episode is Welcome to Wrexham. It's episode number 11, and I'm sure to notice that we have Howard Williams, who we've had before, also known as Archaeodeath, and he actually lives in Wrexham. So, with
Yes.
the popularity of the show and the culturally impact that it is having, I thought we would get a local's opinion and a historical perspective of the town and the area and all of that. So, Howard, Professor Williams, why don't you give us your initial you you're an educator, you're a PhD, you're an
Yeah.
archaeologist, you're out in the fields and all of that. You're not necessarily an ESPN guy, you know, which is a sports network.
No, absolutely not.
So
I've never watched a sports documentary before, but I thought I had to have a check-in on what this phenomenon is, given that I live a mile and a half from the racecourse ground where Wrexham Football Club are based, and the whole 2 seasons of this documentary focus on. I've heard about it in the local news, and obviously I saw when Ryan Reynolds and Ron McElhenney and various of their celebrity pals turn up for football games, it hits the news, but I haven't really. I wanted to. So over Christmas, I binge watched the 2 series, and not only because I'm local, but because I teach and research on the history and archaeology of the English-Welsh borderland, the Anglo-Welsh border, the frontier zone that has been, has a long, deep history going back to the early Middle Ages. I wanted to sort of get a sense of what this documentary is saying and how it's representing the history, culture of the Wrexham town, now city, but also its region. It's part of a county borough that is largely rural and sits right up against the border with England. So yeah, I've been enjoying it, and it's given me a lot of food for thought.
and so it's in the kind of a borderland area from, I've never been to Wrexham. Now I've been to England. I've seen Stonehenge and Shaftesbury. I'm sure I'm saying that wrong.
That's right.
Manchester, Bristol, Glasgow. I've traveled the UK, but I'd never even heard of Wrexham.
Okay.
It was not a place that anyone was like, "Hey, there's this place, not far called Wrexham."
Well, I
Never,
mean, it's not
definitely had
many.
never.
Yeah, until the last couple of years, we
It's
haven't had
kind of
that many tourists, because
yeah,
if you're going to Wales, you'll either go in the south to Swansea or Cardiff, or you'll go to the beautiful West Wales of Pembrokeshire and perhaps a bit of Carmarthenshire, Cardiganshire, Ceredigion. But in the north, you'll go to um, Woodver, you'd go to Snowdonia, to the
yeah,
northwest, maybe to Anglesey, but you won't spend time in the northeast, which has a beautiful, varied, rich, natural and cultural landscape. But it's heavily industrialized with brick, coal, and iron and then steel manufacture, among other things, and has taken a real hit in the last half century with post deindustrialization, unemployment, deprivation, and so many people don't think about Flintshire, Wrexham, Denbighshire as really Wales. They have this sort of, even Welsh people tend to see it as a bit dirty and a bit somewhere you'd never visit. So actually, it's
yeah.
much maligned by both the Welsh themselves and by our English neighbours. And Wrexham isn't a great tourist hotspot, but this is changing, in no small part because of this documentary and this celebrity takeover of the football club.
Yeah, it's definitely put a lot of eyes on it. I mean, it is a very successful documentary, reality TV. whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And so, but the town itself, from what, just jumping on and reading, like, it seems like both the English and the Welsh kind of are like, meh, Wrexham.
Yes, there are many,
Like,
many prettier, more picture postcard parts of Wales, right? And there's many ugly parts of Wrexham, because it's either run down or in post-industrial. But it's a beautiful place, and it has beautiful countryside around it, and it has many, wonderful treasures, historical, cultural to witness. So yes, it's not, as I said, it's not a tourist, hotspot, but it has a lot going for it that has been heavily derided by people both from the town itself, who like to do it down or put it down or don't have much of a self-esteem, and outside. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is that the narrative of the documentary is celebrities inject money and enthusiasm to not only for themselves and their business, but for the community. And, it's all about bringing something to the community. And you could see that if you were a bit of a cynical person such as I am, as another patronising philanthropic sort of gesture TV, where football is kind of is the last bastion of almost LARPing on working class culture, where hyper capitalist business culture can pretend to have working class roots and doing something for the common man. And there's a lot of that in the TV show. Yeah, there's a lot of that you can be critical of. But I have to say, despite my watching it and anticipating of deriding it, the core narrative is authentic. That yes, it is a downtrodden working class town with high unemployment that has itself had a low self-esteem and has been looked down on by both the rest of Wales and by England. And this is a moment where, through its football club and the documentary, something of its character, its culture is being captured and seen in a positive light. So actually, here's me going to watch this thinking I can really just take the mick out of this, at this patronising, take on, oh look, these poor Welsh people, let's go there and inject some culture and wealth into, give them a little hand up. But actually, I think it is a genuine phenomenon. I'm not saying I'm buying into the exact narrative of the TV program, but it is an authentic narrative, and you are getting to see the built environment of Wrexham City and its rural environment around it. You are getting little snapshots. While the core narrative is about the celebrities, the football team, their fortunes, there's enough of the documentary about common people, of fans, of players, of the local environment, that you can get a sense of what Wrexham is like. So yes, I was able to recognise almost every external view. I go, that's that street, and that was a weird experience that I could almost, if I wanted to, I could dox almost every player, because I know exactly where their houses are, and not that I would ever want to do that, but it was weird how, because I am an archaeologist, I have a good eye for houses, streets, pubs, shops, historic buildings, churches. I could work out exactly every aerial drone shot, just for a second before an opening. I could go, I can see why they did that, and that's a view that shows this town and this village and this road, and it was really eerie, but also very touching. And so, while I am cynical, I did think there was a core, authentic narrative to capturing something of the history and culture of Wrexham and its environs.
Yeah, and I understand the hesitancy that you would feel in watching it. Like, as being from Appalachia, the documentary or the TV time that we get is all about moonshining and poor people and rednecks in the woods doing really stupid stuff. Like, that's the picture that the outside world has of us. And so, kind of the English version of that was what a lot of people were expecting Wrexham to be painted as. But really, and it showed kind of that roughneck side, but at the same time, like it did a pretty good job of painting the faces behind it, and
I think so.
not just like oh, here's these Wrexham. Nothing good comes from Wrexham. Yeah,
And I think it showed people of different ages, different genders, different ethnicities, people who have moved to the region, people who are from the area. One episode talks about
right,
there's two episodes on the women's side, who are obviously not as successful or even paid at all, but how their fortunes in the league. There's an episode about an autistic girl, actually two autistic kids, one a child of one of the players, and then they're paralleling that with an autistic fan. And showing how the club
right,
is supporting her and her education and enthusiasm. There's another episode on the Gresford mining disaster of 1934, which not only devastated this was an explosion in the mine that killed 266 miners, and the football club's intimately connected to that disaster because many of the miners who died had swapped shifts from the daytime to the nighttime shift so they could watch Wrexham play football the next day. So there's a in it embodies the interconnection of sport and town, but it's also a disaster that has never left Wrexham. There's a memorial that was set up in the
right,
1980s, but the community is still in trauma generations later from the legacy of that event. It's not just the deaths and the widows and the orphans left behind, it's the entire nature of the settlement of the settlements, because it's not just the city, but it's the mining villages that exist around it. It was affected by this.
right.
So, and to be fair, that was accurately correct, captured. And do you know what? I thought the other honest thing about the documentary was when Rob and Ryan first went to the stadium, went to the racecourse stadium, there was violence broke out afterwards. There was hooliganism, and they dedicated a whole episode of the first season to violence and football and working class culture, if you want to call it that, and the
Yeah,
firms of each club and how they behave and why they do it. And so I mean, yes, a lot was sanitized. They sanitized the nature of violence. They sanitized the reasons and the motives, political and economic, for the closure of the mines in the 1980s. There's a lot that was missed out about Brexit and the impact that's had on the communities of the North East Wales in the last 5-6 years. There's a lot that's missing, shall we say. And
yeah,
one obvious example where they airbrushed out is they had Rob McElhenney and Ryan Reynolds visiting St Giles Church, which is a beautiful medieval church in the centre of Wrexham, and it has a very famous occupant of its churchyard, which is the Welsh American Elihu Yale, who is as well as being a former member of the East India Company and a slaver, was perhaps, and a gambler, was one of the most famous American Welshman, and his tomb. But they were standing right by his tomb, but they didn't mention it because while Wrexham has often paraded Yale as, well, he founded Yale University. He's a famous American Welshman. Obviously, the reality of his
right,
story is a little darker, connected into the times and the
right.
trade and the slaving of that world. So it was interesting to see that they didn't even mention Yale's tomb, which they were standing right next to. So there's little insights I can provide onto the documentary of how they airbrushed out controversial issues. But having said that, there's so much I could commend about the portrait it affords of Wrexham, its people, and its history.
Yeah, and the history is something that I think that should be looked at, more, because especially this place, like the more popular it gets, it's like in Kentucky, the coal mines crashed, and everybody, and I know people whose parents died in coal mining disasters and all of that as well. Like But the show on TV, the Hat with Kevin Costner, the Hatfield and McCoy TV show, that is like my area of Kentucky, and so whenever they made this TV show, there's a huge influx of tourism and people wanting to see these sites and all of that kind of stuff, and you have to capitalize on that. But there's so much history around these areas that just gets completely left out, especially in a town that's like a borderland where, it's kind of been back and forth, back and forth. Rome's been there, this person, that person, like the kings, everybody battling. And this town is the borderlands of all this. And so archaeology wise, it's got to be a pretty important location.
Well, I mean, yes. I mean, there's in terms of the Wrexham borough, which is a bigger space than the city, of course. There's a rich prehistoric archaeology of hunter-gatherers after the last ice age, of early farmers from the Neolithic, of Bronze Age communities, of Iron Age hill forts representing the elite sort of and fortified centres of tribal groupings in the Iron Age. And then you have the Roman archaeology of the area, because this was a strategic area that the Romans had to conquer. And there's a myth that the Romans didn't conquer Wales. Of course they conquered Wales, but Wales didn't exist as an entity yet. But they conquered those territories firmly and securely. And we've got Roman archaeology from the area. My colleague, Dr. Caroline Pudney, has just been excavating a Roman villa near Wrexham. And this is the first and best preserved Roman villa in northeast Wales. So we're finding out more all the time about the Roman occupation. And then my period is the Middle Ages. So we've got it's a contested space in the early Middle Ages, and the Mercians, who are the Midlands English Anglo-Saxon kingdom, were expanding into this territory, and they created two great linear earthworks, Offers Dyke and Watts Dyke, and both of them run through Wrexham Borough. So I suppose my frustration, my biggest, if I was going to pick holes at the documentary as it is, in the first season they stepped aside and had a history light episode where Rob McElhenney and Ryan Reynolds do a sort of fake sports introduction to where is Wales, and then they have a Charlotte Church on, and various other people, and it's all very light, and they do capture, in the crudest, most embarrassingly simple sense, something of the history of Wales. But they don't explain these great linear earthworks of the early Middle Ages. One of which, Watts Dyke, which I've studied and I've published articles on, and I've also done a heritage comic about to explain where it runs and where you can see this great bank and ditch of an earthwork creating a frontier. This wasn't much shorter than the Antonine. It was a bit longer than the Antonine frontier the Romans created in northern Britain, shorter than Hadrian's Wall, but it was a major linear earthwork. Offers Dyke was even longer. That's our longest linear earthwork. But both of these constructions of the 8th or 9th centuries CE run right through this territory of Wrexham, and one of them, Watts Dyke, runs right next to the racecourse ground. So I'm a little frustrated they didn't make something of that, because that's my thing. Wow. And I would have said, look, before Wrexham was even here, where you're competing in your every football home game between you and another enemy was a place of battle, of contestation. They could have really done something there, but unfortunately they didn't have me as a historical advisor. but I suppose. But then Wrexham is a medieval market town. There's medieval castles in the area. There's so much rich heritage you can see in that border zone. Yeah, and even in the English Civil War of the 17th century, of course, Wales was for the king, Chester and rural England was for the Parliament. So the Welsh border saw some real punch-ups. And at Holts, just outside Wrexham, there were two churches, an English and a Welsh community. They sit either side of the river, and the medieval bridge across the river was fought over tooth and nail. Both churches show signs of musket fire and cannon shot damage still from where the parliamentarians who were holed up in Farndon Church and the royalists on the Welsh Holt Church were stationed, literally shooting at each other and trying to gain control of that strategic bridge. So, there's so much history in the area to talk about. It's unbelievable. So, no, this TV documentary is never going to satisfy me because it's just like 5 seconds of, oh yeah, Wales is an old place. There's stuff that happened, and let's get on with the sport. But I think it is an opportunity.
Let's get on with the sport.
Yeah, it is an opportunity to start getting people interested in the heritage of the area. But it's perhaps I'm optimistic, but I think maybe we should have a spin-off series, which is obviously presented by myself, where obviously FX do fund me to spend a good 7-8 episodes going through the history of Wrexham. Yeah, and we get some Appalachian perspectives.
You gotta have your ginger. Like, there's no TV show's complete without a little spice. You gotta have the ginger in there at all times.
And we could just stride around talking about this stuff, Jono, and that should be the documentary. Let it has been said, so it shall be. No, but it's true that there is the potential here of really engaging people in that local history and parallels. And I should say, actually, it's a good point that at a couple of points in the documentary, they do, through Ryan and Rob. Ryan's obviously Canadian. Rob is from Philadelphia, I think. They do try to create North American analogues for viewers, like so talk about the coal industry and
the coal industry,
and they talk about even the Vietnam War is used in. I'm not unsure. I'd love your thoughts on this as a parallel analogy, but they were trying to make the point in sincerity, whether it works or not, that for a community where 266 men die and there are 300 plus orphan children, they make the point, like with wars of the 20th century, although completely different disasters, everyone knows someone who is lost. And I think that's true of all big major conflicts. I mean, every English and Welsh village lost men in the First and Second World Wars almost completely. So I think if they did make a job of trying to make an analogues for North American audiences to get the picture.
I think that they could have, everybody, the wars, to bring war into it, I'm like, it's not the same.
No,
it's not the same thing. Because I have uncles still buried, a great uncle buried in France, like in a field where his plane went down. That's not the same thing as the coal mines collapsing in on top of people, or a just giant explosion. No. That's an industrial level, like where it's just one community where everyone lost their dad. That is a different kind of impact than just war.
To be fair, they did script it very carefully and loosely. So they by saying something, I can't remember exactly the words, but while not in no way the same thing, a parallel can be found in the fact that everyone knew someone. So I'm not defending them, but I think
everyone knew someone that was touched.
Yeah. So I suppose they tried, and I think there were very few moments where I winced. I went, "Oh no!" And you can imagine how cringy these things could have gone. It was certain, and because I don't know these characters very well. I mean, you don't know the personalities very well, but this Ryan and Rob as personalities seem intelligent, sensitive, and considerate in a way that, shall we say, some politicians and celebrities are not. And different buyers could have led to a very different kind of documentary and a different kind of relationship. And I think they do come across as generally interested, caring, and concerned about the community. And yet, while I simultaneously can hold the same thought that it's all a massive PR exercise, I am aware. I think this does some good, and it does come across as authentic and genuine to a degree.
It can be both. Someone can see an opportunity to do a lot of good things, and then go, people would like to watch that. So it can be both. The thing I liked about it, there was nothing exploitive necessarily.
No.
About the people of Wrexham. There was no, for instance, Diane Sawyer. She has the TV personality back in the early. I mean, she might be. I don't even know if she's still alive. But anyway, she's from Appalachia, and she used to do big 60-minute specials and all these things on ABC. And she did a special in Appalachia called "Children of the Mountains," and it was the most depressing. Like you wanted to rip your eyeballs out, like worst of the worst people you can find, like blasted all over national television. And that was one thing that in that documentary, whenever I was like Wrexham, and then I start seeing stereotypes, I was like, all right, let's see what they do here. And
I mean, let's just put it this way: they could have easily. They could have it's a thin line between, it's that Spinal Tap line, isn't it? It's a thin line between clever and shit, or whatever it is. A thin line between good and bad, or whatever it is. But they could. I mean, they're cameoing people in tragic circumstances. People of, like, there's one young girl who plays for the women's team, and her dad had passed away during COVID, mental illness, suicide, and that really had to be handled appropriately. And all I can say is, to my mind, they did it very well. It was tear jerky, but not contrived. It was not, and there was lots of other examples within the TV show where I thought, what are they doing here? Where's this going? And they let a lot of things hanging in the air for you to make inferences. I mean, there's one exchange between the celebrity and one of the locals. I thought you should not have. You could have, to be kind to that person, you could have taken that out, because Ryan Reynolds calls him out for being a bit rude, and you could have you didn't need to include that, because the guy's obviously just running his mouth, a bit drunk in the pub, and you could have just danced over that. You didn't need to actually film that, and I thought that was poor. Right. To be honest, that was the only point that I thought, he's an annoying git. I didn't like him, but everyone's annoying to someone else. And did you really need to show that?
You go to American.
Yeah. So
go to a Cowboys game.
Exactly. There's enough. But they go on. Sorry.
No, I was just agreeing. Those guys are everywhere. And they should have left that. They should have left that out, because, for the documentary, that's just some guy. To Rod Reynolds, that's just some guy. But there's going to be people on the internet who figure out who that guy is and harass him.
Yeah, exactly. Of course. Yeah.
Just because that's just how this works now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But overall, I thought the documentary I wasn't the biggest fan of how they presented some of the stuff they said about autism.
You saw that section? Depressing. Okay, good. I'd like. Right.
Yeah,
Tell me more.
I saw that section, and I get some of the expressions. They're true. Like, I feel guilty that my kids have autism, because I have autism, and I gave it to them.
That was a weird one. That really struck me. Not weird that you said that. That was a weird. I picked up on that too, and I was going to ask. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, so there is that guilty feeling, but at the same time, like, how depressing they made having autism was disappointing. Because they didn't make it seem like that girl would ever find a sense of normalcy. Yeah. She never told her parents that she loves them. Well, my kids have autism, and they say that every day. You know what I mean? And so what happens with autism, and the puzzle pieces, especially Autism Speaks, they tend to act like all of us autistic people are all one person, and that we're all the same, and there's no diversity in our personalities and things like that. And that came across in the way they presented it. And so it wasn't offensive. Like I didn't, it wasn't the worst thing I've ever saw. Like I thought that it was decent, but I was like, you could have done a lot better.
All I would say is I'm not defending it, but as a father of autistic kids myself, I can only say that I winced at some of that, not because I'm judging those people, because
Yes,
I've heard other people say those things. So I can't say I'm angry at the documentary because I've heard people in my area say those kind of narratives, and particularly the hit all of the when kids are the developmental stages. There's a word for it that Brits use. I can't remember what it is, or Welsh. They, when they hit all the stages, almost like it's a tick box. Oh, the kid's walking, the kid's doing this, and it really riled me even before I knew autism was an issue with my kids. This kind of kids are just like on little charts to be ticked off, and that
right,
irks me. And that still irks me. But yes, but I can't say it was inauthentic because I've heard people say those very same narratives. But yes, I think
exactly.
it is an issue when so few programs address these things, and particularly in the sports context, which is all about achievement and elite sport performance. I think it's a problem area still, isn't it? Yeah, I can't deny it.
Right, and you know, and I see like they tried to show that the girl was loving by the things that she was doing for the other autistic kid of the player. And then you have her parents, talking about how hard it is, and then you have these parents talking about how hard it is. Um, but there was no celebration of like the gifts and things that autism
Yeah,
brings, or you know, it
yeah.
it, it was mostly like a rainy day in London episode.
No,
You
I
know,
think that's
that's
fair. I
what it
think
felt
that's fair.
like. All right, yeah, it
That,
it wasn't the worst, but it didn't make me angry. But I just went, eh.
I mean, I suppose my problem with sports generally and sports discourse is, and I don't know if this is something, I'm sure other people could say it better than me, but is the entirety of the narrative of the sports program is that it's all about, obviously achievement and performance and winning, and it almost comes across. An analogy I would make is like a zoo. We've got a new rhino in this week. We're not going to tell you what happened to the old rhino. Like, so you have new players on the scene doing better performance, but what happened to the other guy? Oh, he's gone now. But he
Right.
never. There's a few players they show them being sacked, and even when they show them being sacked, it's almost the slick business stories. Oh, we want you to be, achieving your best at a better club that suits your achievement. And I can almost hear this is British and American business
Right.
talk, and they're all doing it with that working class, down to earth, practical. But what they're doing is they're enshrining this performance, or you'll be, perform or you're sacked mentality,
Yeah.
that and naturalizing it as this is the way we should be treating people. And these families, I mean, they're on short-term contracts, they're on high-pressure jobs, they're dealing with kids with whatever problems, they're dealing with family with whatever problems, and we're all just supposed to, oh, look, honest people of the people, common clay, who are struggling against it, but and yet still
Yeah.
celebrating these business practices that are throwing people out the second they miss one goal, or the second that they have one or two bad performances in a row. And I find that, I have to say, I don't give a toss about the sport. I think it's deeply insidious, and that's why I said I think it is LARPing working class culture, but enshrining this hardcore late capitalist business world into that culture,
Yes.
whereas a lot of working class culture is absolutely antagonistic to that. Now, they do reference that in the program. They do talk about one of the footballers, the one with the autistic girl, that has boots, and he puts on Instagram his new boots that have the phrase, I don't
Boots.
know how you feel like swearing on your podcast, but F the Tories. And the Tories are obviously the equivalent
Yeah.
of, well, the nearest thing is the Republican Party, I suppose, but perhaps the Democrats
You can
fit into
cuss,
the
by the
Tories
way. You
too,
can
really.
cuss.
So,
Yeah. You can cuss all you want.
okay.
I have
So,
I have the podcast set on explicit.
okay. So my point is that, say, they do recognize the working class, anti-elitist, but yet still the entirety of their business practice, and it's enshrining and celebrating this, ditching of hard-working people at a moment's notice, and that I find deeply repellent, to be honest. I have to say, and from a historical perspective, it runs counter to the socialist nature of that community. I'm not saying everyone's a socialist, and from an American audience, socialism has different connotations in Britain to in America. But the working class labour movement, collectivism, care for the community, care for each other, they don't give a flying fart about that. And I suppose in the Gressford story, they also make clear that the mine owners got away scot-free despite 266 men dying because they didn't ventilate the shaft properly. That's why they died, right? They died because of poor industrial practice. They didn't die just as an accident or just these things happen. And I want, and I suppose the other thing about the documentary I should say is they recorded one of the descendants of the miners talking about her dad was one of the dead. So she was in her 80s, but she was a child, age 3, when the disaster happened. So she would be, very old. And she used the phrase I see on gravestones, which is people don't die in mining disasters, they're killed in mining disasters. People are killed in the mine. They don't just pass away or fall asleep in Jesus in the mine or whatever euphemism you want. They are killed, and they're killed in war, and they're killed in the mine. They're the two killings. You may be also killed by a motor car or killed by a falling tree, but you're certainly, that language, it makes clear that working class people see these spaces and environments as deeply hostile to them and deeply So we have to avoid that romanticizing of football too. Football's not killing people, but it's the same discourse and climate of being hostile to people's well-being, I think. So I would, if you wanted me to go really opinionated, I would say that, it's lovely that some people like football. It's lovely that people can, band around it and see it as a focus for the community. But also this competitive nature of society is something that we should be deeply disdaining of. But hey, maybe that's going off track.
No, yeah, you're right. Well, and even in America, like the coal mines of Appalachia, what people don't really realize is that, in the mid 1800s, 1870s, 1860s, when the coal mines in Appalachia were really, the first coal mines were in Richmond, Virginia, and it was all plantation workers and things like that. Natives had coal mines way before we even got here. But then the first, regular Appalachian coal mine workers, it was the Scots, the Irish, some Welsh, and then African Americans. And they were all socialists. And they took the phrase from the Scottish Presbyterians, they called themselves the Rednecks. And they unionized together under the banner of being called redneck. Didn't matter where you were from. And so they unionized together because of these working conditions, because people were being killed in the mines. And they fought 13 battles, actual wars, with the mining companies, Battle of Blair Mountain, Bloody Harlan. And so they're killed in these incidents. And that's why we have unions in America, is because of these socialist movements, that brought us safe working conditions. But that attitude that you're talking about does bleed over. A local boss is watching Ryan Reynolds operate his shop, and he goes, okay, that's Ryan's successful, so I'm going to model that. And then before you know it, it's just cutthroat, and there's no...
Yeah.
This is why we have unions.
Throwing a bit of money at autistic kids charities or at disabled, one-armed, red-headed people or whatever. I'm making things up, or whatever you may be. Being shown on camera, doing benevolent things towards groups who, is not enough. You want to actually take this seriously. So the lead striker, who is basically ditched and sacked after the first season, or that they're there, bye-bye. You never see him again. And why should they? Why should they film that? But that's why I go back to my analogy with zoos. It's like, what happened to that old tiger? Oh, he's not here anymore. It's just like, oh, we've got another midfielder. Well, what happened to the other midfielder then? Oh, and they do, to be fair, they do show the dynamic of this play out with some of the goalkeepers and the tensions and issues.
Right.
And they have one player who says, I'm just sitting on the bench. No, I'm not being called. I want to go to another. And they basically sack him to release him from his contract as a benevolent. And he went off and did very good things. So it's not all bad. But I think we've got to be aware of the way this is enshrining in our culture, a particularly insidious set of working practices. And you could say, well, Howard, football is not working in a local shop. Fine. But as you say, this is the elite. This is being celebrated as a working class, salt of the earth. Everyone celebrates this football club success, but it's being built on a lot of money, and a lot of practices that would not be in any way match up with the nature of a working class community that actually cared about its community.
The club itself has lost money the last 2 years. The only reason it has been profitable is the show.
Yeah.
That's where all the sponsorship, all the money that's fluctuating in and things like that. It's because of the TV show. It's not because necessarily, Wrexham soccer is on fire. It's because, the reality TV show has caused a buzz around this small town underdog, which, I mean, if you talk to other people around the area, what I saw on YouTube today, they think Wrexham already had it made. They were already a good club. They were already a celebrated thing. They were already this and that. And Ryan picked the best of the best to build this pretend story on. That's what the fans of the other clubs are saying.
Well, I'm
So
not
what
a
do you think
football
about that?
fan.
That's what
I'm not a football analyst. I would say that is a bit of a stretch of a narrative to make that work from what I've seen. But I can't comment on that in any detail. All I would say is that they could have picked a Premiership or a Championship club if they really wanted just to waltz in. They didn't. They picked a fifth division, not even full English Football League club, and they've got them in 2.5 years to back into the EFL. So they did a job, and they did it with money.
They're finding success.
And they're finding success because they're investing. I mean, that's my sense. I'm not an expert in this, but I think it is. That's why I say that it's not a completely contrived. You'd have to really stretch it to claim this is a completely contrived narrative. Of course, they're getting benefit from money. But then also, I thought, to be fair, I'm not a football fan, but they did shine a positive light on other clubs too. Not always, but they
absolutely.
And it's a capturing something of the nature of English football or English and Welsh football more broadly. I don't think it's following one club, but you could pick any of those other clubs and follow a similar story. So I don't think in defence of the programme, I don't think that's at all a fair characterisation. But I'm maybe biased.
Well, and I think they did a really good job of talking about the club that kind of started from nothing with just the friends who were got together and decided to do a soccer team, and they don't even have a stadium, and they talk about just how these guys are just playing on heart and heart alone. And I thought that they did a really good job of painting the spirit of English football.
Yes, I think that's true.
In Welsh football and just the UK. I mean, they could have bought Manchester United. That team's been in the pits for 100 years now. It feels like they did go to a place that was that had need.
And they also, to be fair to them, make clear that money can't buy you success. Is that you can create conditions, but you can't. If you've got the wrong manager and the wrong players, they may be talented individually, but if you haven't put them together as a team, we all know that. But I think that's explained quite well in the program. So I have a lot of. I'm just trying to navigate a genre I'm not used to, and a kind of, but because it's so local to me and it links to the history of the area, I'm just fascinated by seeing what happens and how they play out with this. But I think the format is so good in the sense that there's a lot of potential for seasons 3 and 4, delving more into the history
Yes.
and culture of the region. And so, and now they know they've got a success on their hands, they should be able to take risks without just going over the same old ground. But who knows? But I think there's a lot of potential for basically hiring you and me to to do a sort of English slash or British slash Welsh slash American perspectives on the history of industry and but
Hey, put me with a language specialist and give me a kilt, and there's no way they'd be able to tell I'm not Scottish.
exactly, and I can make
I've
myself
got the look
Welsh.
down. I can
can't make
be
myself
William
young, but I
Wallace's
can make myself Welsh.
direct offspring. Yeah, I can't make my hair come back. Back here, yeah, the front's good, but when you get back here, it's all gone. But the history of this town. So there's your colleagues. I've got articles like this written by your
Yes.
friends.
Yes, yeah. I was on the site. I
Roman
did some
villas
TikToks on the
near-
site in 2022 when it was being excavated.
Yes.
So
So
some
tell
really
me
good
about
stuff.
that, because I'm sure, anything Roman, people are going to want to know about. Someone's visiting Wrexham, they're going to want to know, hey, there's a Roman villa here.
Yeah. So
So
Dr. Caroline Pudney and my students and colleagues collaborating with Wrexham Museum to do that project, and they found a villa that was not only a villa, which is a wing corridor villa, but they've also found parts of its landscape and possibly a medieval chapel rebuilt from Roman stone, Roman masonry and Roman tile, right next to it. So we've got a really exciting set of
oh wow,
archaeology there. More work needs to be done, but they've, really good project. We had an open day and invited the local community, and all of this is within a short distance of Chester and Wrexham. So yeah, it's a really exciting project. I've done work on Watts Dyke and and Offers Dyke and reinterpreting these linear earthworks of the early Middle Ages. There's many more projects to be done in the area, and obviously now that Rob and Ryan are going to be funding all my research and you doing the documentary with me, and it's all going to be happening obviously because this podcast. But seriously, if there's so much potential. My university is still obsessed with England though, and I live and work
right.
across the border, and it's amazing how it does make a difference. Is that so I'm looking to do more research on the early Middle Ages. I've just had a PhD student finish who looked at all the metal detected finds that have been responsibly reported to the Portable Antiquities Scheme for the Welsh English borderland, and she's been able to find new evidence of archaeological sites of central places or markets in the early Middle Ages right up to the Viking Age. So we've got new discoveries of shedding light on an area that's been often overlooked. Like its football club, the archaeology of this region has been under researched, and there's a lot more to be done.
And it seems like, especially with this place's location, the archaeology really could be endless at this place. When I saw them digging up around the stadium and kind of doing new things, I was fully expecting them to hit something find some sort of something under the ground there, that had just been built over.
Well, actually, the other thing, of course, is that I'm very interested in the archaeology of the stadium itself, not in terms of them finding old stuff, which I don't think they did any work. They didn't do any digging down. They were just removing the old stand. But I am interested in the way they showed that, and the way that demolition was such a feature of Series 2, and how the incremental destruction and temporary replacement. How they've completely changed the lighting. So the skyline of Wrexham has changed because they've changed the four main, what do you call them? The main lights, the main spotlights, the big, they've completely changed them, and they're all,
stadium
I don't know, they haven't shown them yet, but we saw them go up one by one over the weeks, and they've got these new ones, and they tilt. So they look like they're in mid fall. They're really disconcerting. But I can't wait for them to appear in season 3. But the whole of the skyline of Wrexham is changing. And the other thing that's really interesting that I want to see is if they do build this new stand, they're going to incorporate one of the pit head wheels as a memorial to the mining disaster and the mining heritage of the area, as a sort of a piece of sculpture slash memorial to front the new stadium. So they've designed a forecourt space. I think it would be called a forecourt or an open area space with this sculpture as part of their design. Because at the moment, it's not just about having extra seating. At the moment, they've got no real front showpiece. The stadium kind of just abuts onto the road with an old pub that is the Turf, which is where the football club started. And it all looks a bit, even though the stadium racecourse isn't that old, it looks all a bit shoddy. And so this new design, as we see it unfold, is going to be a kind of facade,
Upgrade.
but an upgrade, a new set of seating, but it's also going to be a showcase for the history and heritage of the area, if I understand it correctly. So I think I'm interested in how the architecture of the stadium is going to be made. Will it reflect their aspirations of what they claim to be doing, of celebrating the community? It seems like they're trying to do that, and I want to see how it plays out. So let's wait for season 3 and 4. But I've already been doing my little snooping around now that I've got my brain into gear. I'm 2.5 years late, but I've finally got my brain into gear. I'm sort of taking photographs of what's going on in and around the stadium, so I can chart some of this happening. So the archaeology of now, if you like, of what's happening.
And there's archaeology can be used. I mean, you have sites in Wrexham like the Holt Castle.
Yes.
Have you? I'm sure you've done TikToks from there, right?
The Lion's Castle, Holt Castle's a complete underwhelming site to visit. There's very little to see because it's been so systematically robbed, but it is a phenomenon. It was one of the biggest castles in Wales. It was a big Marcher Lord castle of the late 13th, 14th century, and it withstood. Was it the longest siege in the English Civil War, because it's got a moat that's fed by the River Dee, so you can't dam it up. It's utterly impenetrable. So it was once a very formidable castle, but so little of it survives. But they did Wrexham Museum did some recent excavations there, and they did some new heritage interpretation with panels, so you can get more of a sense of how it would have looked. And it's a really important castle, but just it's not particularly picturesque to look at, but you've got to use your imagination. So it's a great site. There's so many, but then Holt is a whole medieval town. You can go there and basically walk down the modern village high street, and you're walking down a medieval street, because the plan is there's no old buildings, there's no medieval buildings, but the entire plan of the village is set up as the borough was in the late 13th, early 14th century. So you're in a fossilized landscape. So it's trying to convey things like that to visitors, rather than just, there's a dramatic castle perched on a pinnacle. Some of these lowland castles right by the river would have been really dramatic, but just so little of them survives. So it's about trying to tell that story. Yeah, there's a lot of really cool stuff in Wrexham.
And that's what I want to kind of draw people's attention to, is like, yes, there's this kind of cool celebrity story happening, but at the same time, it's happening in a place that one is very stereotyped against and has seen its economic disasters, much like places in Appalachia has in the United States. But it's in such an important historical location because it's in the borderlands, and they found things like is it the Brimo Man?
Brumbo Man,
Is that the Brumbo Man?
Yes. So this was an excavated Bronze Age kist burial, and it was found ahead of housing developments, and it probably was under a barrow originally, or a series of burial mounds on a ridgetop. And he's like the local ancestor, Brumbo Man. It makes it sound like sort of some sort of, I don't know, it's easily mocked, but and they've done a facial reconstruction of him in the museum, and he doesn't look like the brightest of chaps, but in his reconstruction, but he is like our, he is an intriguing burial, yeah. So it's we do have traces of Bronze Age burials, and that's the one they've put on display in the museum as the sort of iconic local ancestor. But of course, the problem was only about 13% of his skeleton survived, because in the Bronze Age, what people were doing was going back to graves and opening them up and taking bones out again, because they were crazy like that. No, they were probably using the bones for all manner of other uses and worship and commemoration, and so kists didn't stay unopened. So we don't have much of Brumbo Man, actually. We only have a bit of him.
No,
but he's pretty
no,
cool.
it's like his head and like a femur and
Yes, that's it. Yeah,
like there's
and so
not
the
much.
museum, it's every school kid in Wrexham goes to see Brumbo Man at the Wrexham Museum.
This is
But this is
why
where archaeology can do the job that football can't, because we can provide that deep time story rather than just what happened in 1948 or 1934 or 1864, whatever it may be. We can provide that deep roots for communities that I think, yeah, I mean, we only know fragments of that story, but it's an important part of that narrative of why are people the way they are. And not everyone necessarily think of Brumbo Man as an ancestor, as in I am descended from him, but it's about, when I say ancestor, I mean in the sense of a linchpin of a communal deep time focus, something people can
Right,
be spiritually or at
an
least
aerial
culturally
person.
connected to, rather than necessarily say I am descended from, my family has never left Wrexham in 50,000 generations. It's not about necessarily that. It's about Wrexham has a whole, as many parts of England and Wales are a multicultural community. There's a deep, historically rooted Polish community. I hear as much Polish spoken as I hear Welsh in Wrexham. It's not just local people, local ancestors for local people type thing, but museums can provide that anchor for the story of a place, and I think Wrexham Museum does a
Right.
good job. And again, if I have to criticise the documentary, they haven't featured Wrexham Museum yet, so shame on them for that.
I was going to mention that because I spent a lot of time looking at the Wrexham Museum and the things that they have on display just on their website, and I'm like, why this would be such a better way to explain Wrexham to people, is for Ryan and the other celebrity to walk through and do this historic tour and like.
I think so. I mean, basically, they've done a Wales for let's introduce Wales to Americans. Wales isn't in England. They did that in series 1. I think in
It's
series 3 or 4, they need to come back with a couple of deep dive episodes that explore
Yeah,
the local hit story, which isn't just about being in Wales or just about being in Britain. We've got to, if they want to talk the talk and actually bolster this local heritage, then they need to feature the museum, they need to feature Watts Dyke, they need to feature Holt Castle, they need to do that job. Yeah. So obviously us striding around the
yeah,
landscape is the way to do it, but I'll wait for them to give me a call.
yeah. And how does archaeology, take these old places, not even old places. Like you could send an archaeologist into where the mining disaster happened, and he could tell you things about that area that never made it out of the mine. That never made it out the story. He could tell you stories that never made it out. Same with the coal mines in Appalachia. Same with Stonehenge. Same with Holt Castle. Like, what is it about archaeology that the public misunderstands in your role in these things? Like, um, because like you guys can reconstruct whole civilizations, or starting
Yeah.
to, with just very little information.
Well, I think from all people, it's the fact that archaeology sheds a material witness onto things. We are looking at, the story isn't in words. It can be in images. It can be in words, of course. Archaeologists work with documents all the time. But
Right.
the thing that I think is powerful is that tangible material framing, that everything from the built environment of houses and streets down to the tiniest artifact that can tell a story. And I think that's where
Right.
archaeology can so powerfully connect in. And so when I see these documentaries waxing lyrical about the power of place and the power of things, and here's our wonderful stadium, I see they're struggling towards an archaeological way of understanding that community, and they're not quite there because they haven't consulted or thought about it archaeologically. But actually, many people who watch archaeology documentaries are making that link for them, are making that connection, because I think we've got a lot of historical and archaeological literacy now in TV watchers and
Right.
broader communities that are doing that link for them. But I think there's more that could be explored there, because we are the subject that tells the story of humankind, all periods, all people, whether they left written records or not. And that is really powerful. And also, it can be very emotive. It can be incredibly, almost too emotive. It can bring up uncomfortable memories. It can bring up uncomfortable associations and juxtapositions that don't quite sit readily with our comfortable story. And all history should be, all critical history should be, or good history should be challenging and disturbing, I suppose, at some level. But I think
Right.
archaeology can do that in ways that sort of trip up even the most, well-versed historian or most confident person of the locality knows their narrative. They can suddenly go, oh
Well,
God, I'm face to face with an object that was last worn by or last used by people in the Bronze Age or the Roman period or the Middle Ages. Yeah,
and the thing that I have found that I'm liking about archaeology more and more is that, the story of history goes to the winners of history.
oh yes,
And
absolutely.
archaeology can peel that back. For instance, a lot of people think that Native Americans, were these Stone Age technology people that, never made it out of throwing spears at one another. And then archaeology, like no archaeologist would tell you that story. A historian would, because they've only consulted the history books that the winners of those stories wrote. But archaeology would say, no, there was vast civilizations. There's evidence of mines,
Yeah.
copper mines, like 9,000 years ago. There's cities that had 50,000 people in them. Like, there's all these massive civilizations all over the northern United States. But if you consult, a American historian with just a basic BA, they're not going to remotely tell you that story.
I mean, I would love to live in a world where, frankly, the discipline of archaeology and the discipline of history didn't exist, because neither
Right.
do a job. Having those separate disciplines, it doesn't make any sense. No one, no. There's a host of specialist archaeological methods and techniques, but frankly, there's just different types of past explorer or whatever you want to call it. I'm not saying we should jettison the terms historian or archaeologist. I mean, for many people, they're familiar and they work. But when I joked about when I went on a TV documentary a few years ago and I got called historian, and they put the caption up and I winced, mainly because my history colleagues were going to mock me about it. So yes, and I got the text message,
Right.
oh, historian Howard Williams. So you're giving up on the archaeology now, are you, Howard? You realised what the best discipline is, because we always have these little banters. But in all sincerity, archaeological history is the same as other kinds of history. It's just a form of constructing a critical and detailed source-rich stories that challenge preconceived
Yeah.
ideas and help people to understand who they are, where they've come from, and something about their locality or their identity. I mean, or challenge those aspects of locality and identity. I mean, that's what we should be doing. So
Both.
archaeology should not be seen as a hermetically sealed other discipline. And if I had my way, even though I am I'm a professor of archaeology, I would not be crying if my discipline stopped being accepted as a separate thing, because I think actually that would be the beginning of archaeology in many ways as a discipline. Our journey towards being recognized as a discipline will perhaps end. The beginning of our journey will end, not the journey. The beginning of the journey will end when finally we accept that archaeology is nothing special. It's not a separate discipline. It is part of that story of telling of the human journey. I don't know if that's a radical thing to say, but I think people get very fixated on term. So I'm not insulted. I pretend to be insulted just because it's part of the banter, but I'm not really insulted when I get called a historian. I say it as a compliment, but because for many in media, that is the term for people who tell us things from the past. I sometimes criticize that and question that, but I see it as no bad thing that if people can be convinced I'm a historian, that shows I'm doing something right, I think.
Yeah. I mean, and ultimately, like, you're studying the same subject from just one from a book perspective and one from a simple evidential perspective.
Absolutely.
But both, like, if one tells a different story than the other, then like we need to find out why.
Exactly.
And we need to correct why. And that's something that I'm not necessarily seeing just yet across the board.
Well, hopefully we'll see more of it.
Now, is there any ongoing like archaeology projects in Wrexham? Any kind of like exciting things
in the city itself,
in the world of digging?
None that I can tell you about. I know about things, but they're not in the public domain yet, so I'm afraid I can't lift the lid. So I've heard rumours of just one exciting project.
So you work for the CIA?
I'd have to kill you and all the audience and everyone they know, or mind rub your brains with mind erasers, because obviously the CIA have that technology and have since the 60s, based on a whole series of documentaries I've just made up in my head.
If the screen flashes red.
Exactly.
If the screen flashes red, you all know what happened.
No, there's some exciting discoveries that I've heard about of individual metal detected finds, and there's also some exciting projects that are ongoing, but I can't divulge because they're not my projects to divulge. But I haven't done any excavations in Wrexham area myself, but I know of projects that are producing exciting stuff. So that's very vague.
I think that you should change. I think you should change that and get in on some of these projects. Get out there and dig.
Oh, I've got so much going on. I've got books to write. So you are a historian. Exactly. I'm just an armchair historian, no less. I sometimes sit down. I've been known to sit down, so I'm an armchair historian, yeah.
No, I think that this documentary, though, is good. I think that more small places could use documentaries like this to shine light on areas that are struggling, that can bring in tourism and things like that. But at the same time, like, I think that like the history of places are so important that I don't want that to get lost in the story.
Yeah. I mean, where else? If you took the two episodes, episode 7 of season 1 and episode 10 of season 2, you've got more there, and there's other bits, sprinkled throughout. But you probably got, if you take the sprinkle bits and those 2 episodes, you've got a nice hour story of Wrexham. And maybe. Where else do you get that? And it's just so lucky that we have a TV show about a football club that is allowing that to happen. But so many other places deserve that kind of rich local story being told. And you could do that about just a mile drive, an hour drive from where I live. You could do that about Denbighshire. You could do about Chester. You could do that about Birkenhead. One of the great shipbuilding centres of the world. It's just up the road from here on the Mersey. Liverpool, Warrington, Stafford, Stoke. There's so many stories. Of English and Welsh local history, rather than it just being England, Wales. These kind of national blocks that we obsess with telling the story of. It's about people and place. Yeah,
and if Ryan Reynolds is successful, I would imagine you would see a few celebrities following suit from the United States because we like money. Um, and if he is successful, I'm sure that that's probably going to happen. You will probably see something like that, especially if they see the dollars. Um, and now the last, not last question, but as we wrap this down,
Oh yeah.
um, what is the English's issues with redheads and the Welsh?
Well, they're two different things, People mock
Yes,
redheads all over Britain, and then there is and what do they have? Well, I don't think I'm not sure of any coincidence of Welsh and redhead. I think they're different prejudices.
they
I
are. They are, but they come from the same
do they? I mean, there's an
the same group of
anti-Celtic.
people.
There's an anti-Celtic slash
Yes.
dimension. So anyone who fits, there's an anti-Welsh, Scottish, Irish, Manx. There's that, English anti everyone else angle, and I suppose there's also just this. I don't understand this redhead thing. I don't understand it. I can't put my finger on it. I mean, I've seen it in comedy shows, pop culture, ginger tosser, all this stuff. It's everywhere. And I often,
It's
and
everywhere.
this is because obviously I don't see colour. He says, I don't see colour. Some of my best friends are redhead, and I didn't even think about it. There you are. That's my. No, but seriously, I don't. I actually have a problem that I don't actually make connections between these generalised insults and individuals. And I go, when people say things about weight or height or hair colour, and I go, oh, that would apply to you. No, I don't say it to them, but I go, oh, that would apply to you. I forget that these
Yeah.
generalised things are out there in British culture still, and it
Oh
must be
yeah.
exhausting, because there is a lot of ginger hate in Britain, and I can't justify it or understand it really. I don't think I would reduce it to just being about not liking Welsh or Scottish people or something like that, or Irish people. I think it's just a general people have a weird angle on it. I don't understand it. I don't get it.
It
So
is
I have
like
no insight there
like
other than it's wrong. It's wrong.
you know in America, if an English speaking person was to call a redhead a ginger, there is a 50-50% chance that you're gonna get a black eye. Um,
Oh, is ginger in
it
itself a
is,
slur then? I didn't realise it was a.
yeah.
Oh,
Oh,
sorry, I
from
shouldn't have
from
said the
you all.
word. I
Oh, yes, from. No, I've had it directed in the negative way, but like talking about it like just normal. But no, it's an English slur for us Northerners.
I am
You
sorry. I can
and it
only
has the
apologise.
same lettering. It has the same lettering as another English slur that y'all gave to some people, and it even sounds similar.
Yeah. Okay.
Has it hit your head yet?
There's actually a couple are coming to mind, but let's not go there. But anyway, yeah, yeah. But
Yeah, that's
I
not
don't
right.
want to admit to knowing even more offensive knowledge of terms and things.
Yeah,
But
so funny. No, but no, I say that kind of tongue in cheek because it is true, but at the same time, like one of the stereotypes of the English is that they stereotype everybody,
yeah, and it
and
happens all the
it's
time.
not really the case.
And I'm very privileged.
Yeah,
I don't
but
feel
you
attacked a lot of the time. But then I did a TikTok about this that even literally a couple of weeks ago, I was chatting with an academic and they didn't know I was living in Wrexham and that I'd been living in Wrexham for 15 years. And they went, oh, something like Wrexham, it's an awful place, God, awful place. And in this kind of posh English way. And I was going, and I just went, is they joking? But no, they are. They are an academic who they won't make it clear who it is because it could be one of at least 10 people. If the people know I know, but they are almost parodies of themselves. They're almost like English people brought into an episode of Cheers or something like that. That or The West Wing or something. Like they got look, it's like you can't make up. They can't. You're watching it. Oh God, people like that don't exist, but they do. They exist, and they are like almost parodies of an American stereotype of British people. And he was doing this to me, and I was just felt really personally offended. I felt defensive about Wrexham, and I thought, you bastard, yeah. But I thought, what's the point in saying anything, I thought,
Yeah.
But I felt very Welsh. I went, ah! He didn't mention the hair colour.
I feel that way about Appalachia, and when I see, but at the same time, when I see some of those stereotypes and people go, is people in Appalachia like that? And I'm like, well, 98% of us aren't, but there is that percentage.
There is an element.
There is that percentage that, that's a pretty accurate description.
Or for Wrexham, it'd be, no, I won't have that. It's not 100% of people. It's, well, maybe 97%. But no. It's there's always a small number. It's always a small number that make the stereotype real. And but
All right. Well, it has been great. Do you have any other thoughts on? This had a light go out. Any other thoughts on Wrexham that you would like to share with?
Well, I suppose if I was going to be really positive, I'd say that regardless of this kind of cringe, if you think, football TV celebrity takeover is going to be just cringe, give it a go, because you will learn things about Wales. You'll learn things about football. You'll learn things about people, and it's a kind show. It's an authentic show. Yes, I have quibbles. Yes, there are critiques to be made, but I think it is an authentic and kind, generous portrait of a place and a story, and I hope they don't lose that in future seasons, and they keep that mixture of history, and there's more archaeology and history baked into the narrative, because I think it's needed. Yeah, that's all I want to say.
And I know Ryan Reynolds is going to watch this, and he's going to go, these two. We are like we need. We got to hire them.
We've got the beauty, the charisma that they lack, as well as the knowledge. So it's about we're the package. We're the full package. They see that. They'll know that. But whether they admit that or not, I think we deserve a place in at least a 5-minute cameo.
Hey, I'll take it. Because the other thing that I noticed about London, or in England and Scotland, y'all's doorways are way too small. And the older buildings, your doorways are no more than 6 feet.
Yeah. What do you need
why
more
is
for?
this?
Built up floor level.
6'5". I'm 6'5".
You're 6'5". Look.
There's literally, I remember going through doors in England where like my shoulders touched both sides, and I had to do this. It was like getting in a freaking airplane bathroom. Like
it's to keep you lot out. It's to keep you giants out.
That's what it is. You don't want anyone over 6 foot in your country.
We've got
discrimination against tall people.
Exactly. It's not hair. It's not hair color. It's height.
It's height. That's what it is. I mean,
we don't like to be intimidated by tall people.
I remember thinking, imagine Shaq trying to fit through some of these doors. Because in America, every door is 7 foot tall, and at least 2 to 3 foot wide. And so no one has any issues, but it's a different world over there. Stuff is small, and is that a reflection of it being ordered? Is that a reflection of because people used to be smaller?
I don't think it's
because of nutrition.
Only slightly. Your nutrition.
Only slightly.
Yeah, I mean, people were on average a little shorter, and people were a little thinner, quite a bit thinner than the average modern Brit or modern American. But I don't think it's that. It's there's a lot of things that never have
You're
been
just being
designed or
jerks.
worked. Yeah, just being jerks. We thought ahead and we thought we're going to
Jerks.
piss off Americans in the 21st century, and we were already planning for it in the 16th, 17th century. We were just visionaries, really. A visionary, creating architecture to annoy.
That is funny. It was. I felt. Oh no, I felt gigantic. Walking through some of the buildings in London. I mean, it was quite the sight, especially on those red buses.
Oh yeah,
I went up top. I went up top and just sat where there wasn't a roof.
you were like
It
this.
was much easier to sit up there.
Oh, it was easier
Yeah,
up there, right?
yep.
Okay.
And oh yeah, it's easier because there's no roof on the double
Oh,
decker.
the top.
A lot
Oh,
of the
yeah.
double
Okay, I get your point. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it was much easier to sit up top because you're not, walking down the thing like this.
I thought you'd
But
start complaining about
all
the fact
right,
we had
well,
these stupid buses without roofs on. What the heck's that? Doesn't it never rain? You know? But
no. The only actual complaint that I had about London or the UK was the food.
our food's
The
brilliant.
food, brilliantly bad.
How
Really?
dare you? How dare you?
Oh,
Yeah. It's London food is
listen.
overpriced and really bad. Yeah.
I'm going
I
to
blame London.
there needs to be a English seasoning care package that we can melt. You know what I mean? Like, here, this will make all of your food taste better. Put it on anything.
I'm not denying it. There's some shocking things I
Like,
see every day. But
potatoes and beans for every meal is just,
yeah, we can't do without it, can you?
oh,
What do you want?
that's
Tall
the
doors and
worst.
beans as options? You've got to have them. It's the law.
Oh my. It was, that was the biggest difference for me was even at McDonald's, like you go to, it does not taste the same at all. Not even close.
All right.
It's not the McDonald's in the US, like compared to, the McDonald's that I went to downtown London, just outside of Piccadilly, like, nope, not the same.
You should
Y'all
write
is
to
way
them.
drier.
We managed to ruin everything, even things that are mass produced and formula. We'll manage to screw it up somehow. I assure you.
It's the fun of it though.
It's
I,
good.
and I like being able to laugh at it because America does the same thing with other, we're all
Yeah.
just a melting pot of
Absolutely.
nonsense.
Absolutely.
So, and we make the best of it. So, thank you for joining us, though.
It's been
Adam,
great.
just like
Thank you
before,
so
give
much.
us a second. Yeah, I really enjoy it, and I'm always looking to throw up episodes. So, anytime you have content that you want to throw out there, just shoot me a message, and literally anytime.
Thank you. Thank you
My
very much.
next guest actually is a former NFL player.
This is Jono's World, conversation for everyone.